I was sitting on my back patio in Scottsdale, Arizona, enjoying the late afternoon breeze when I noticed Heather Garrison marching across my lawn like she owned the place. The tight-lipped expression on her face and the manila folder clutched in her perfectly manicured hands told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. As president of the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association, Heather had made it her personal mission to make my life miserable ever since I moved into this neighborhood 6 months ago. "Marcus Eastwood," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We need to talk about your propane tank." I set down my iced tea and looked over at the standard 20-pound propane tank sitting next to my grill. It was positioned safely on my patio, well away from any structures, exactly where it should be. What about it? "The HOA board has decided that all propane tanks must be stored in the communal storage area behind the clubhouse," she announced, flipping open her folder to reveal what looked like freshly printed pages. "This is a safety regulation that takes effect immediately." I stood up slowly, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Heather, I've read the HOA bylaws front to back. There's nothing in there about propane tank storage requirements." Her lips pressed into an even thinner line. "Well, we're updating the regulations. As HOA president, I have the authority to implement emergency safety measures. I'll need you to move that tank within the next 24 hours. "Emergency safety measures?" I raised an eyebrow. "That tank has been sitting there since I moved in. What changed?" Heather's cheeks flushed slightly and her eyes darted away for just a moment. "That's not your concern. The rule applies to everyone in the neighborhood." "Everyone?" I crossed my arms. "So Tom Martinez next door has to move his tanks too? And the Johnsons down the street with their backup tank for their generator?" "Yes, everyone," she snapped. "Now I expect full compliance by tomorrow evening." She turned on her heel and started walking away, but something about the whole situation felt off. I'd dealt with enough HOA nonsense in the past 6 months to know when Heather was being particularly unreasonable, but this seemed different. More desperate somehow. The next morning, I was heading out to my truck when I noticed Tom Martinez waving me down from his driveway. "Hey Marcus, did the HOA lady get to you too?" he called out. I walked over. "About the propane tanks? Yeah, yesterday evening." Tom shook his head. "Here's the thing though. She came to my place this morning, and when I asked about moving my tank to the communal storage, she told me mine was fine where it was. Said the rule only applied to certain properties." My suspicions immediately kicked into high gear. "That's interesting. Very interesting." "I thought so too," Tom said. "Especially since she kept looking over at your place while we were talking. You two have some kind of beef." "You could say that," I replied. "She's been on my case since I moved in. First it was my mailbox being the wrong shade of black, then my grass being a 1/4 inch too long, then my holiday lights being up 2 days past the neighborhood deadline." Tom laughed. "Yeah, she's a piece of work, but this seems different, more personal." After Tom went inside, I sat in my truck for a moment, thinking. Then I pulled out my phone and called my buddy Derek, who lived 3 streets over in the same development. "Derek, it's Marcus. Quick question. Did Heather Garrison contact you about moving your propane tank?" "My what?" "No, man." "Why would she? Is this another one of her crusades?" "Something like that. Thanks." I hung up and drummed my fingers on the steering wheel, so the rule applied to everyone except it only applied to me. That was a clear violation of HOA regulations, which specifically stated that all rules must be applied uniformly across the neighborhood. More than that, it suggested Heather had some ulterior motive. I decided to do a little investigating. My job as a licensed propane technician and safety inspector gave me a unique perspective on gas handling regulations, and I had a feeling I knew where this was going. But I needed proof. That afternoon, I drove to the HOA clubhouse to check out this communal storage area Heather had mentioned. The clubhouse itself was a decent-sized building near the front of the development, with a pool, gym, and meeting rooms. Behind it, I found a small fenced area with a few storage sheds. What I didn't find was any kind of proper propane storage facility. No ventilation, no fire suppression systems, no proper safety signage, and certainly no compliance with National Fire Protection Association codes. If Heather actually tried to store multiple propane tanks back here, it would be a disaster waiting to happen. But that wasn't the most interesting discovery. As I was walking around the back of the clubhouse, I heard voices coming from the patio area. I recognized Heather's sharp tone immediately. "I already told you, Patricia, I'll have it handled by this weekend," Heather was saying. "Marcus will move his tank and then we'll have enough propane for the fundraiser." Another woman's voice responded, "But why not just buy propane like everyone else? Why make this so complicated?" "Because I already spent the fundraiser budget on the new clubhouse furniture," Heather hissed. "The board doesn't know yet, and they won't find out if we just use the propane we collect from the storage policy. We'll have the barbecue, raise the money, and I'll cover my tracks before anyone notices." I felt my jaw clench. So that was it. Heather wasn't implementing some safety policy. She was trying to steal my propane to cover up her own embezzlement. The woman had some nerve. I quietly pulled out my phone and started recording, making sure to capture the rest of their conversation. "What about the other homeowners?" Patricia asked. "Won't they wonder why their propane is being used?" "I'm only targeting Marcus right now," Heather replied. "He's new, he's already filed complaints against me, and no one will believe him if he makes a fuss. Once I get his tank, I'll probably need 1 or 2 more for the fundraiser, but I'll deal with that later." "I don't know, Heather, this seems risky. Just trust me, I've been running this HOA for 8 years, I know what I'm doing." I'd heard enough. I stopped recording and headed back to my truck, my mind racing. Heather wasn't just abusing her power. She was committing fraud and attempting to steal personal property to cover up embezzlement. This was way beyond typical HOA pettiness. Back home, I started making calls. First to an attorney friend who specialized in HOA law, then to the Arizona Department of Fire Safety, and finally to the Scottsdale Police non-emergency line to ask about my options for reporting fraud. My attorney friend, Rachel Torres, called me back within an hour. "Marcus, from what you're describing, this is both a civil and criminal matter," she explained. "The embezzlement is definitely criminal, and the attempted theft of your propane could be considered theft by deception. The safety violations are another layer entirely. What should my next move be?" I asked. "Don't move your propane tank. You're not violating any legitimate rules. Document everything. If she escalates, that just gives you more evidence. I'll draft a cease and desist letter outlining your rights as a homeowner and her obligations under the HOA bylaws. If she continues after receiving that, we can take further action." "What about the embezzlement? Should I report that now? Get more documentation first if you can. The recording is good, but if you can access HOA financial records, that would be even better. As a homeowner, you have the right to request those documents." That evening, I sent a formal email to the HOA board requesting access to the last year of financial records, as was my right under Arizona HOA law. I also mentioned that I wanted to review the proposed propane storage policy that had been referenced by the president. The response came at 9 o'clock that night, and it wasn't from Heather. It was from the board secretary, a guy named Vincent Mueller, who I'd met once at a neighborhood barbecue. "Marcus, this is the first I'm hearing about any propane storage policy. Can you provide more details? Also, the financial records will be made available at the next board meeting, which is scheduled for next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Perfect." Either Heather hadn't informed the board of her made-up policy, or she'd acted entirely on her own authority. Both scenarios worked in my favor. I responded to Vincent, thanking him and confirming I'd attend Tuesday's meeting. Then I forwarded the entire email chain to Rachel. The next day was Saturday, and I was in my garage organizing some tools when Heather appeared again. This time she wasn't alone. She had a man with her who I didn't recognize, carrying what looked like a utility dolly. "Marcus Eastwood, this is your final warning," Heather announced. "If you don't voluntarily move your propane tank, we'll be forced to remove it ourselves under HOA authority." I stepped out of the garage, making sure to keep my phone recording in my shirt pocket. "Heather, I spoke with Board Secretary Vincent Mueller yesterday. He says there's no approved propane storage policy. So unless you can show me documentation of board approval, that tank stays exactly where it is." Her face went red. "I'm the president of this HOA. I don't need board approval for emergency safety measures." "Actually, according to Article 7, Section 3 of our bylaws, you do," I replied calmly. "Emergency measures can only be implemented by presidential authority if they address an immediate threat to life or property. A propane tank that's been sitting safely on my patio for 6 months doesn't qualify." The man with the dolly looked uncomfortable. "Heather, maybe we should wait for the board meeting." "No," she snapped. "We're handling this now." She turned back to me. "Marcus, you're being unreasonable. This is about community safety." "Is it?" I pulled out my phone, this time visibly. "Because I have a recording of you admitting that you need my propane for the HOA fundraiser because you spent the fundraiser budget on furniture. That's not about safety, Heather. That's theft." The color drained from her face. "You were eavesdropping on a private conversation. You were having that conversation on HOA property in a semi-public area while discussing your plans to steal my property. Arizona is a one-party consent state for recordings, and even if it wasn't, you have no reasonable expectation of privacy on the clubhouse patio." The man with the dolly set it down. "I'm out. Heather, you told me this was official HOA business. If you're just trying to take this guy's stuff, count me out." He walked away, leaving Heather standing alone on my driveway. "You have no idea what you're doing," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I will make your life in this neighborhood a living hell." I'd be careful about making threats, especially since I'm recording this conversation too. I kept my voice level. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave my property. You're going to stop harassing me about my propane tank. And on Tuesday, you're going to explain to the board where the fundraiser budget actually went. If you do those things, maybe we can resolve this without involving the police." "The police?" She laughed, but it sounded forced. "You can't prove anything." "I can prove you admitted to embezzlement and attempted theft. I can prove you tried to create a fake HOA policy to target me specifically. I can prove you violated HOA bylaws by not applying rules uniformly. And I'm willing to bet that if someone audits the HOA finances, they'll find even more irregularities." I crossed my arms. "So yeah, I can prove plenty." Heather stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating her options. Finally, she turned and walked away without another word. I went inside and immediately called Rachel to update her on what had just happened. "Perfect," she said. "You handled that exactly right. Now she's on record making threats and attempting to follow through on her theft. Keep that recording safe. And Marcus, be prepared for her to try something else before Tuesday. People like this don't give up easily. Rachel wasn't wrong. On Sunday afternoon, I received a notice taped to my front door claiming I was being fined $250 for failure to comply with HOA safety regulations. The notice was printed on official HOA letterhead and cited the same non-existent propane policy. I photographed the notice, sent it to Rachel, and then posted in our neighborhood Facebook group, which had about 200 members. Quick question for my neighbors, I wrote. Has anyone else received fines related to propane tank storage? The HOA president informed me this was a neighborhood-wide policy, but I'm trying to confirm the details. Within an hour, I had over 30 responses. Not a single person had heard anything about propane storage rules. Several people mentioned they'd had recent interactions with Heather about various issues, but nothing about propane tanks. A few neighbors started asking questions about where this policy came from and why it wasn't announced properly. Then Vincent Mueller, the board secretary, commented on my post. This is Vincent from the HOA board. I want to assure everyone that no propane storage policy has been approved by the board. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. to address this situation. All homeowners are welcome to attend. Marcus, please bring any documentation you have regarding this matter. I could only imagine how Heather reacted when she saw that post. Part of me felt a little bad about how publicly this was unfolding, but she'd brought it on herself. If she'd just let me keep my propane tank in peace, none of this would have happened. Monday evening, I arrived at the clubhouse 15 minutes early. The meeting room was already half full, with curious neighbors eager to see what was going on. Tom Martinez waved me over to sit with him. "This is wild, man," he said. "I heard from Susan Chen that Heather's been acting weird for weeks, defensive about questions, avoiding budget discussions, that kind of thing." The board members started filing in. Besides Vincent, there was Treasurer Margaret Wu and board members David Santos and Jennifer Price. Heather came in last, looking composed but tense. She sat at the head of the table and called the meeting to order. "Before we address tonight's agenda," Vincent said immediately, "I believe we need to discuss the propane storage policy that's been brought to our attention." Heather cleared her throat. "I implemented that policy under emergency authority after receiving complaints about safety concerns." "What complaints?" Margaret asked. "I haven't seen any documentation of safety complaints." "They were verbal complaints from concerned neighbors," Heather replied. "Names?" Vincent pressed. Heather hesitated. "I don't have them written down. But as president, I have the authority to address safety issues." David Santos leaned forward. "Heather, we've been over this before. You can't just make up policies without board approval. That's not how this works." "I'm trying to protect this neighborhood," Heather insisted, her voice rising. "If someone gets hurt because of an improperly stored propane tank, the HOA could be liable." I raised my hand. "May I speak?" Vincent nodded. "Go ahead, Marcus." I stood up and pulled out my phone. "I'm a licensed propane technician and safety inspector. My certification number is PT 47823 with the National Propane Gas Association. I'm also certified by the Arizona Department of Fire Safety. My propane tank is stored in complete compliance with all relevant safety codes." Heather's eyes widened slightly. She clearly hadn't known about my professional credentials. I continued. "Beyond that, I have evidence that this policy wasn't created for safety reasons at all." I looked at Vincent. "Would the board like to hear a recording that explains the real motivation?" "That's private conversation," Heather jumped in. "It's inadmissible." It was recorded in a public area of HOA property and it's absolutely admissible, Rachel said from the back of the room. I hadn't even noticed her come in. I'm Rachel Torres, Marcus's attorney. The recording was legally obtained and is relevant to this discussion. Vincent looked at the other board members who all nodded. We'd like to hear it. I played the recording of Heather's conversation with Patricia, where she admitted to spending the fundraiser budget and planning to take my propane to cover it up. The room went completely silent as everyone listened. When it ended, at least 50 people started talking at once. Vincent banged a gavel on the table. Everyone, please, let's maintain order. He turned to Heather, his expression a mix of disappointment and anger. Heather, is what we just heard accurate? That recording is taken out of context, Heather stammered. I was just joking with Patricia. I never actually spent the fundraiser budget. Then you won't mind if we review the financial records right now, Margaret said, opening her laptop. As treasurer, I have access to all accounts. She started typing, her expression growing darker with each passing second. Heather, there's a withdrawal of $15,000 from the fundraiser account dated 3 weeks ago. The notation says approved clubhouse improvements, but we never approved $15,000 in improvements. The furniture was necessary, Heather said defensively. The old furniture was falling apart. The old furniture was 2 years old and in perfect condition, David said. I was just sitting on those couches last month. Jennifer spoke up for the first time. Where's the old furniture now? I donated it, Heather said quickly. To where? Jennifer pressed. Heather didn't answer. The silence stretched out uncomfortably. Tom Martinez stood up from beside me. I think I know where it went. My cousin works at a consignment furniture store in Phoenix. 3 weeks ago, someone matching Heather's description sold a bunch of commercial furniture. He remembered because she was very insistent about getting cash instead of a check. The room erupted again. This time, Vincent didn't even try to restore order immediately. He just stared at Heather with an expression of complete betrayal. Finally, Rachel stood up. I think it's time to involve the authorities. We're not just talking about HOA policy violations anymore. We're talking about embezzlement, fraud, and attempted theft. The Scottsdale police need to be notified. That won't be necessary, Heather said quickly, standing up. I'll return the money, all of it. This was just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, Vincent's voice was sharp. You stole from the HOA, sold our furniture, and tried to steal a homeowner's property to cover it up. That's not a misunderstanding, Heather. That's multiple crimes. I made some poor choices, Heather admitted, and for the first time she looked genuinely scared. But I've dedicated 8 years to this neighborhood. Doesn't that count for something? It counts for making this even more disappointing, Margaret said quietly. You betrayed our trust, Heather. Vincent pulled out his phone. I'm calling the police now. Board members, we need to vote to suspend Heather's authority as president effective immediately. Wait, Heather pleaded. Please, can we talk about this privately? No, all 4 other board members said in unison. 2 police officers arrived about 20 minutes later. Officers Blake Henderson and Amy Chen took statements from me, the board members, and several other witnesses. I provided them with copies of my recordings and the fraudulent fine notice. Margaret gave them access to the HOA financial records. Heather tried to explain herself to the officers, but with each word, she just made things worse. She admitted to taking the money, selling the furniture, and creating the fake propane policy. She even admitted that she'd planned to take propane tanks from other homeowners too, if mine wasn't enough. Madam, I'm placing you under arrest for embezzlement and attempted theft, Officer Henderson said, pulling out his handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. As Heather was being read her Miranda rights, I saw genuine tears in her eyes. Part of me felt sympathy. 8 years of her life dedicated to this neighborhood, and she'd thrown it all away for $15,000 and some furniture. But then, I remembered how she'd tried to bully me, threaten me, and steal from me, all while abusing her authority. The sympathy faded quickly. After Heather was taken away in the patrol car, the meeting continued for another hour. The board voted unanimously to remove Heather from her position and to pursue full restitution. They also voted to cooperate completely with the police investigation and to conduct a full audit of the HOA finances to ensure there weren't any other irregularities. Vincent approached me as the meeting was breaking up. "Marcus, I want to apologize on behalf of the entire board. We should have been paying closer attention to what Heather was doing. Your propane tank is obviously fine where it is, and that ridiculous fine is voided." "I appreciate that," I said. "And for what it's worth, I don't blame the board. Heather was good at covering her tracks. Still, we should have done better." He paused. "You know, we're going to need a new president, and given how thoroughly you research things and stand up for your rights, you'd be a great candidate." I laughed. "Thanks, but I think I'll pass. I've had enough HOA drama for a lifetime." Tom Martinez walked over. "I'll take that nomination if you're offering. Someone needs to make sure this doesn't happen again." Over the next few weeks, the full extent of Heather's misconduct came to light. The audit revealed that she'd been skimming money from the HOA for over 2 years, starting with small amounts and gradually increasing. The total came to just over $32,000. The furniture was eventually found in her storage unit, and it was returned to the clubhouse. The consignment store confirmed Tom's cousin's story about Heather selling furniture for cash. The criminal case moved forward quickly. With so much evidence and her admission on the night of her arrest, Heather's attorney advised her to take a plea deal. She pled guilty to embezzlement and attempted theft, receiving 3 years of probation, a 10-year ban from serving on any HOA board in Arizona, and was ordered to make full restitution plus penalties. She also had to perform 500 hours of community service. The HOA filed a civil suit as well, seeking additional damages for the cost of the audit, legal fees, and the damage to the community's reputation. That case settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, but Vincent told me privately that Heather had to sell her house in the neighborhood to pay everything she owed. Tom was elected as the new HOA president, and one of his first acts was to implement new financial oversight procedures to prevent future embezzlement. All expenditures over $500 now required approval from at least 3 board members, and the treasurer's reports were posted publicly every month. Life in Saguaro Heights returned to normal, or at least as normal as any HOA neighborhood could be. My propane tank remained exactly where it was, and no one ever bothered me about it again. In fact, when I was grilling out one evening about a month after everything went down, at least a dozen neighbors stopped by to chat and thank me for exposing Heather's fraud. "You saved us all a lot of money," Susan Chen said, accepting a burger from my grill. "Who knows how much more she would have stolen if you hadn't caught her." "I just wanted to keep my propane tank," I replied with a shrug. "Everything else kind of snowballed from there." "Still," Tom said, "you could have just let it go. A lot of people would have. They'd move the tank to avoid the hassle, pay the fine, whatever. You stood your ground." "I've learned that standing your ground is important," I said, "especially when dealing with people who abuse authority. If you give in once, they'll just keep pushing." Rachel Torres stopped by later that evening after most of the neighbors had left. "Congratulations on your successful resistance to HOA tyranny," she said with a grin. You know, this whole situation would make a great case study for my law students. Feel free to use it, I told her. Just change the names to protect the guilty. Actually, it's all public record now, she pointed out. Court documents, police reports, the works. But I appreciate the sentiment. She accepted a cold drink and sat down on my patio. You know what the interesting thing is about cases like this? They almost never come to light because most people don't know their rights. Heather had been president for 8 years, remember? How many other homeowners did she bully during that time? How many paid fines they didn't actually owe or followed rules that didn't actually exist? Probably a lot, I admitted. Definitely a lot, Rachel corrected. And it's not just this HOA. There are Heathers in neighborhoods all across the country, abusing their little bit of power and making people's lives miserable. The only thing that stops them is when someone like you pushes back. I thought about that. Rachel was right. If I just moved my propane tank that first day, Heather would still be in power, still stealing money, still bullying homeowners. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply say no to unreasonable demands. The summer fundraiser did eventually happen, about 2 months late. Tom and the new board organized it, and it was actually a great event. They bought plenty of propane, all legitimate and properly funded. I volunteered to help with the grills, using my professional expertise to make sure everything was safe and up to code. At one point during the event, Patricia, the woman who'd been talking with Heather that day, came up to me. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I should have spoken up when Heather told me her plan. I knew it was wrong, but I convinced myself it wasn't my problem." "You did the right thing in the end," I said. "Your testimony helped the police build their case." "I should have done it sooner," she insisted. "I'm just glad you were brave enough to stand up to her. I wasn't." "It's not about bravery," I told her. "It's about knowing your rights and not being afraid to assert them. Anyone can do it if they're willing to accept a little confrontation." As the sun set over Scottsdale that evening, I looked around at my neighbors laughing, eating, and enjoying themselves. Kids were running around playing games. The smell of grilled food filled the air. This was what an HOA was supposed to be about: community, togetherness, not petty tyranny and embezzlement. My propane tank sat peacefully on my patio where it had always been and where it would stay. It had become something of a neighborhood joke, actually. People would walk by and say, "Hey Marcus, still got your tank?" And I'd reply, "Yep, and it's not going anywhere." Tom came over as I was cleaning the grill. "You know, I've been thinking about getting new nameplates for the board members. Maybe we should get you an honorary one. Marcus Eastwood, protector of propane." I laughed. "How about we just stick with guy who likes to grill in peace?" "Fair enough," Tom said. "But seriously, thanks for everything. You could have made this a huge mess, dragged the whole neighborhood through a scandal, maybe even sued the HOA for harassment. But you handled it as quietly as possible and let the system work." "The system only works if people use it," I replied. "That's the lesson here. HOAs have rules and bylaws for a reason. When someone tries to ignore those rules, you have to call them out on it. Doesn't matter if it's the president, a board member, or just a busybody neighbor." Several weeks later, I got a call from Officer Amy Chen, one of the officers who'd responded that night. "Mr. Eastwood, I wanted to let you know that Mrs. Garrison's sentencing hearing is next week. The prosecutor wanted to know if you'd like to make a victim impact statement." I thought about it. What would that involve? You'd have an opportunity to tell the judge how her actions affected you. It can influence sentencing, though in this case, with the plea agreement, the basic terms are already set. But it's your right as a victim. Can I think about it? Of course. Let me know by Friday. I spent the next few days considering it. Was I a victim? Technically, Heather had tried to steal my property and had harassed me with fraudulent fines and threats. But compared to what she'd done to the HOA as a whole, my experience seemed minor. In the end, I decided to make a statement, but not for the reasons people might expect. The courthouse in downtown Scottsdale was busy the day of the sentencing. I arrived early and met with the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Linda Morrison, who walked me through what would happen. When it was time for victim statements, several HOA board members spoke about the betrayal of trust and the damage to the community. Margaret Wu talked about the hours she'd spent auditing the finances and the stress it had caused. Then it was my turn. I stood at the podium and looked at Heather, who sat at the defense table looking small and defeated. Her attorney sat beside her, and her husband was in the gallery, looking miserable. "Your Honor, my name is Marcus Eastwood, and I'm the homeowner whose propane tank started this whole situation." A few people in the courtroom chuckled softly. When Mrs. Garrison first approached me about moving my tank, I was annoyed. When she tried to fine me and threaten me, I was angry. But now, mostly I'm just disappointed. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I moved to Saguaro Heights because it seemed like a nice community. Good people, well-maintained properties, the kind of place you'd be proud to call home. And it is those things, but not because of the HOA. It's that way because of the neighbors who care about each other and take pride in their homes. I looked directly at Heather. What you did wasn't just about stealing money or trying to take my propane. You took a position of trust and used it for personal gain. You bullied people and made up rules to suit your own needs. You made people afraid to speak up because you held power over them. That's the real crime here. Not the money, but the abuse of authority. Heather's eyes were red, but I couldn't tell if she was genuinely remorseful or just sorry she got caught. "I hope you learn from this," I continued. "And I hope other HOA board members across the country learn from it too. Power, even small power like running a neighborhood association, comes with responsibility. When you abuse that power, you hurt real people, you damage communities, and eventually you destroy yourself." I stepped away from the podium and sat back down. The judge thanked me and heard from a few more speakers before delivering her remarks. "Mrs. Garrison," Judge Rebecca Foster said, "you held a position of trust for many years. The people of your community elected you to serve their interests, not your own. Your actions constitute a serious breach of that trust. While I'm bound by the plea agreement in terms of the basic sentence structure, I want to be clear about something. This court takes fraud and embezzlement very seriously, especially when it involves community organizations and the abuse of fiduciary duty." She continued, "You'll serve 3 years of supervised probation. During that time, you'll make full restitution as ordered, complete your community service, and comply with all terms of your probation. Additionally, as part of your community service, you'll develop and present educational materials about HOA financial oversight and ethical governance. Perhaps some good can come from this if future HOA board members learn from your mistakes." Heather nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, Your Honor, thank you," and that was it. Years of her life as HOA president, all her authority and power, ended in a courtroom with a judge's pronouncement and the quiet clicking of handcuffs as she was processed for probation intake. I left the courthouse feeling strangely empty. Justice had been served, but it didn't feel triumphant. Just necessary and somewhat sad. Tom called me that evening. "Hey, I heard about the sentencing. How do you feel?" "Honestly, I'm just glad it's over," I said. "I'm ready to move on." "Well, good news then." The board voted to use part of the recovered funds to throw a neighborhood block party next month. A real celebration, not just a fundraiser. "You interested in helping with the grills again?" Absolutely, I replied. That sounds perfect. The block party was indeed perfect. The entire neighborhood showed up, and for the first time since I'd moved in, it really felt like a community. People who'd been afraid to speak up during Heather's reign were now actively participating in neighborhood discussions. New people volunteered for committees. The HOA was transforming from a source of fear and frustration into what it should have always been, a tool for making the neighborhood better. During the party, a young couple who just moved into the neighborhood approached me. "Are you Marcus?" the woman asked. "The one with the propane tank?" I laughed. That's me, though I prefer to think of myself as more than just a guy with a tank. "We heard about what happened with the old HOA president," the man said. "Our real estate agent actually told us about it. She said this was a neighborhood where people stood up for what was right." "She's not wrong," I said, "though I hope the drama is behind us now." "Actually, that's kind of why we wanted to talk to you," the woman said. "I'm a CPA and my husband is an attorney. We were thinking about volunteering for the HOA board to help make sure what happened with Mrs. Garrison never happens again, but we're new and we don't really know anyone yet." "Tom," I called out, waving the HOA president over, "got some volunteers for you." As Tom chatted with the new couple about getting involved, I felt a sense of satisfaction. This was the real victory. Not Heather's arrest or sentencing, but the transformation of the neighborhood into something better. People were engaged now, paying attention, making sure their community was run properly. Later that night, as I sat on my patio with my propane tank beside me and a cold drink in my hand, I reflected on everything that had happened. A few months ago, I'd been the new guy in the neighborhood, just trying to live my life in peace. Now I was the guy who'd taken down a corrupt HOA president and helped transform the community, all because I refused to let someone bully me into moving a propane tank. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Saw the news coverage of the sentencing. Well done. Drinks on Friday to celebrate." "Sure," I texted back. "But no HOA talk, I need a break." "Deal," she replied. "Though I should warn you, I might have another HOA case coming up. Different neighborhoods, similar issues. Interested in being a consultant?" I thought about it for a moment, then typed my response. "Maybe. But only if they have a legitimate case. I'm not looking to cause trouble." "Of course not," Rachel sent back. "But you're good at standing up to people who abuse authority. That's a valuable skill." She wasn't wrong. The whole experience had taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to accept unreasonable demands. Not with aggression or confrontation for its own sake, but with calm assertion of your rights and willingness to see things through. The next morning, I was washing my truck when my neighbor Derek pulled up. "Marcus, got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" "So, I just got a notice from my HOA," he said. Derek lived in a different section of Scottsdale with its own HOA. "They're saying my solar panels violate the architectural guidelines and I need to remove them." "Do they actually violate the guidelines?" I asked. "That's the thing, I don't know. The guidelines are pretty vague, but these panels were approved by the board before I installed them last year. Now there's a new board member who says they're not approved and she's threatening fines." I set down my sponge. "Do you have the approval in writing?" "Yeah, an email from the old board president." "Then you're probably fine." Arizona law is pretty clear about solar installations and HOA restrictions. Let me give you Rachel Torres's number. She's an HOA attorney and she's good. "Thanks, man. I didn't know who else to ask, and after what you went through, I figured you'd understand." As Derek left, I realized that Heather's case had become something of a teaching moment for the whole area. People were more aware of their rights now, more willing to question authority, and more likely to stand up for themselves. That was a good thing, even if it meant I occasionally got pulled into other people's HOA disputes. The following Tuesday, I attended the regular HOA board meeting. I'd made it a habit to go at least once a month, just to stay informed about what was happening in the neighborhood. Tom was doing a good job as president, keeping things transparent and making sure all decisions were made democratically. Before we move to new business, Tom said during the meeting, I want to recognize that this is the 3-month anniversary of our new board structure. In that time, we've implemented new financial controls, increased transparency, and seen a significant increase in homeowner participation. I think we can all be proud of how far we've come. There was applause from the 20 or so homeowners in attendance. It was a far cry from the packed emergency meeting when Heather was arrested, but it was a healthy number for a regular monthly meeting. Now, Tom continued, we need to discuss the proposal for new community garden plots. Jennifer, do you want to present? As Jennifer Price outlined the community garden proposal, complete with budget, maintenance plans, and liability considerations, I was struck by how different this was from Heather's reign. Everything was above board, documented, and voted on properly. This was how an HOA was supposed to work. After the meeting, Margaret Wu approached me. Marcus, I wanted to thank you again. If you hadn't pushed back against Heather, I would never have looked deeper into the finances. I've been treasurer for 3 years and I trusted her completely. That was my failure. It wasn't your failure, I said. Heather was good at hiding what she was doing. The important thing is that once the truth came out, you acted on it immediately. Still, I should have been more vigilant, Margaret insisted. I've started taking online courses in financial management and HOA accounting. I never want to be in a position where I miss something like that again. That's great, I said sincerely. The neighborhood is lucky to have someone who cares that much. As I drove home that night, I thought about how one person's actions could ripple through a community. Heather's corruption had affected dozens of families, but so had the response to her corruption. People were more engaged now, more careful, more aware of their rights and responsibilities. My propane tank, sitting innocently on my patio, had been the catalyst for all of it. If Heather had chosen to target anyone else, or if she'd been a little smarter about her embezzlement, she might have gotten away with it for years. But she'd picked the wrong person to bully, and it had cost her everything. I didn't take any pleasure in her downfall. But I did take satisfaction in knowing that the neighborhood was better off now, and that other HOA board members in the area had gotten a very clear message about the consequences of abusing their authority. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a local community meeting about HOA rights and responsibilities. The meeting was organized by a group of homeowners from various neighborhoods who were concerned about HOA overreach and wanted to educate themselves and others. I accepted the invitation, and on a warm Saturday morning in September, I found myself standing in front of about 60 people at a community center in Phoenix. My name is Marcus Eastwood, I began, and I almost let someone steal my propane tank. That got a few laughs and caught everyone's attention. I spent the next hour telling the story, from Heather's first demand to her eventual sentencing. But I focused less on the drama and more on the lessons learned. The key thing to understand, I explained, is that HOA board members are not kings and queens. They have specific, limited powers defined by your bylaws and state law. When someone exceeds those powers, you have the right and the responsibility to push back. I talked about the importance of reading your HOA documents, attending meetings, and keeping records. I explained how to request financial documents, how to file complaints, and when to involve attorneys or law enforcement. But the most important thing, I concluded, is to not be afraid. People like Heather Garrison rely on fear and intimidation. They count on you being too worried about fines or social consequences to stand up for yourself. Once you push past that fear and assert your rights calmly and professionally, their power evaporates. During the question and answer session, a woman in the back raised her hand. "What if the whole board is corrupt? What do you do then?" "That's harder," I admitted, "but you still have options. First, organize with other homeowners. There's strength in numbers. Second, document everything. Third, don't be afraid to go outside the HOA. File complaints with state regulatory agencies, contact local media, hire an attorney. Most HOAs would rather fix problems than face public scrutiny or legal action." Another person asked, "Do you think HOAs are a bad thing? Should we try to eliminate them?" "No," I said. HOAs serve important purposes. They maintain common areas, enforce basic standards that protect property values, and organize community activities. The problem isn't HOAs themselves. It's when specific individuals abuse their power within the HOA structure. With proper oversight and engaged homeowners, HOAs can be a positive force. After the meeting, several people came up to thank me and share their own HOA horror stories. Some were worse than mine. Stories of elderly people being harassed over minor violations, families being fined thousands of dollars for petty infractions, and board members engaging in favoritism and retaliation. Each story reinforced the importance of what had happened with Heather. Her prosecution sent a message that HOA board members could be held accountable for their actions. That was a message more people needed to hear. As I drove back to Scottsdale that afternoon, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't expected. I'd moved to Saguaro Heights just looking for a nice place to live. Instead, I'd found myself at the center of a situation that had larger implications for HOA governance across the region. My phone rang as I was pulling into my driveway. It was Rachel. "Marcus, I've got something interesting for you," she said. "Remember how I mentioned I might need a consultant on another HOA case?" "Yeah, what's going on?" "There's a neighborhood in Temp where the HOA president is trying to ban all outdoor grills, including gas and charcoal. Claims they're fire hazards, but several homeowners think he's just angry because his next-door neighbor has cookouts that he doesn't get invited to." I laughed. So petty retaliation disguised as safety concerns. Sounds familiar. The homeowners want to fight it, but they need an expert witness who can testify about grill safety and proper fire code compliance. Interested? I thought about my peaceful patio, my propane tank, and my hard-won right to grill in peace. Then I thought about other homeowners facing similar bullying tactics from their HOA boards. "Send me the details," I said. "Let's make sure these people can keep their grills." "I knew you'd say yes," Rachel said. "You know, you're developing quite the reputation as the guy who fights HOA overreach. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "Definitely good. Someone needs to stand up to these petty tyrants. Might as well be someone who knows what he's talking about and isn't afraid of confrontation." After hanging up with Rachel, I sat on my patio and fired up my grill. It was just for myself tonight, nothing fancy. But as I watched the flames heat up and smelled the propane burning clean and safe, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. My propane tank had started a revolution of sorts. Not a violent revolution, but a quiet one. A revolution of people realizing they didn't have to accept unreasonable demands from authority figures. A revolution of transparency, accountability, and standing up for what was right. Over the next year, I became increasingly involved in HOA issues, not just in my neighborhood but across the Phoenix metro area. I testified at 3 different court cases involving HOA disputes. I spoke at a dozen community meetings. I even helped Rachel draft model bylaws for HOAs that included better financial oversight and clearer limits on board authority. Heather Garrison completed her community service and probation without incident. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd moved to New Mexico to live with her sister. Her house sold for a good price, which was fortunate because she needed the money to complete her restitution payments. I never spoke to her again after the sentencing hearing, but I thought about her sometimes. How someone who dedicated years to community service had lost sight of what service actually meant. How easy it was to rationalize small ethical compromises until they became major crimes. How power, even the limited power of an HOA presidency, could corrupt if you weren't careful. Tom served 2 terms as HOA president before stepping down. The new president was Jessica Carter, a retired engineer who brought systematic thinking and careful oversight to the position. Under her leadership, Saguaro Heights implemented regular financial audits, term limits for board members, and mandatory training on HOA governance and fiduciary responsibility. The neighborhood thrived. Property values increased. Community participation remained high. And my propane tank stayed exactly where it belonged, a quiet symbol of the importance of standing your ground. 3 years after the whole situation began, I was grilling out on a Saturday afternoon when a moving truck pulled up across the street. A new family was moving in. I watched as they unloaded furniture and boxes, the familiar chaos of moving day unfolding. Later that evening, I saw the dad setting up a grill on his back patio. I walked over with a 6-pack of beer. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said. "I'm Marcus from across the street." "Thanks," he replied, shaking my hand. "I'm David. My wife Sarah is inside trying to convince our kids that unpacking is more important than finding the game systems." "I remember those days," I said with a laugh. "Listen, I brought you some beer and I wanted to give you some advice about the HOA. David's expression immediately became wary. "Oh no, are they strict here?" "Actually, they're great now," I assured him. "But they weren't always. Let me tell you a story about why you should never let anyone tell you where to keep your propane tank." As the sun set over Scottsdale, I told David the whole story. He listened with growing amazement, occasionally interrupting with questions or expressions of disbelief. "So that tank right there," he said, pointing at my patio, "started all of that." "That tank right there," I confirmed. The lesson being, know your rights, stand up for yourself, and don't let anyone bully you into complying with made-up rules. David raised his beer. "I'll drink to that, and thanks for the warning, though it sounds like your HOA learned its lesson." "They did," I said. "But it never hurts to stay informed and pay attention. HOAs are only as good as the people running them and the homeowners holding them accountable." We talked for another hour, and I gave David the same advice I'd given dozens of other homeowners. Read your bylaws, attend meetings, ask questions. Don't be afraid to push back when something doesn't seem right. As I walked back to my house that night, I looked at my propane tank sitting peacefully on the patio. Such a small thing to cause so much trouble. But it had never really been about the tank. It had been about power, accountability, and the courage to say no to unreasonable demands. The tank had become something of a neighborhood landmark. Kids playing in the street would use it as a reference point. "Meet me at Mr. Eastwood's tank at 4 o'clock. Neighbors giving directions would say, "Turn left at the house with the famous propane tank." I'd been offered money by a local news station to do an interview about the whole situation, but I'd declined. The story was public record, but I didn't need to be on TV talking about it. The important thing was that justice had been served, the neighborhood had improved, and other people had learned from the experience. But the story did spread through word of mouth and neighborhood social media. I occasionally got emails from homeowners in other states asking for advice about their own HOA disputes. I helped when I could, usually by connecting them with attorneys who specialized in HOA law, or by providing information about their rights under their state statutes. One email that stuck with me came from a woman in Colorado. Her HOA was trying to force her to remove a wheelchair ramp that her disabled daughter needed. The HOA claimed it violated architectural guidelines. I was able to connect her with an attorney and provide information about the Fair Housing Act's requirements for reasonable accommodations. Last I heard, she'd won her case, and the HOA had not only backed down but had also paid her legal fees. That felt good. Using my experience to help others felt like the right thing to do. 5 years after the initial incident, I was at the annual neighborhood barbecue when Tom approached me with a plaque. "Marcus, on behalf of the Saguaro Heights HOA, I wanted to present you with this," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The plaque read, "Presented to Marcus Eastwood in recognition of his courage in standing up for homeowner rights and his role in promoting transparency and accountability in HOA governance." I was genuinely touched. Thank you, though I feel like I should share this with my propane tank. It did most of the work. Everyone laughed and someone shouted, "Speech!" I held up my hands. No speech. Just a reminder that this neighborhood belongs to all of us. The HOA exists to serve homeowners, not the other way around. As long as we remember that and hold our leaders accountable, we'll be fine. More applause, and then the party continued. But several people came up to me throughout the evening to thank me privately for what I'd done. Some had been afraid to speak up during Heather's time in power. Others hadn't realized they had rights worth defending. All of them appreciated that someone had been willing to take a stand. As the party wound down and I was helping clean up, Jessica Carter, the current HOA president, pulled me aside. "Marcus, I wanted to let you know that the State HOA Oversight Board is developing new model bylaws and governance guidelines. They've asked if they can use what happened here as a case study in what not to do and how to fix it when things go wrong." "That's fine with me," I said. If Heather's mistakes can help other HOAs avoid similar problems, then something good came out of the whole mess. "You know," Jessica said thoughtfully, "what you did changed more than just this neighborhood. I've been to regional HOA conferences, and people are talking about the Garrison case. It's making board members think twice about abusing their authority. It's making homeowners more willing to speak up. That's a significant impact." I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, but she was right. One person standing up for their rights had created ripples that spread far beyond Saguaro Heights. That night, sitting on my patio with my faithful propane tank beside me, I reflected on the journey. What had started as simple refusal to comply with an unreasonable demand had transformed into something much larger. A corrupt official held accountable. A neighborhood transformed. Other homeowners empowered. All because I wouldn't let someone take my propane tank. The grill heated up nicely as I prepared dinner. The propane flowed smoothly and safely, exactly as it should. Somewhere in a house in New Mexico, Heather Garrison was presumably living her life, hopefully having learned from her mistakes. And here in Scottsdale, life went on in a neighborhood that had learned the hard way about accountability and governance. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Got another one. HOA in Mesa trying to ban all outdoor furniture except approved colors. Interested? I smiled and typed back, "Send me the details," because that's what I did now. I helped people stand up to unreasonable HOA demands. I testified about safety regulations and proper governance. I educated homeowners about their rights. All of it stemming from one simple decision not to move a propane tank. As I bit into my perfectly grilled burger, I thought about all the homeowners out there facing similar situations. Some would stand up for themselves. Others would comply and suffer in silence. My hope was that more people would choose to stand up, to know their rights, and to hold their HOA boards accountable. Because at the end of the day, that's what made communities work. Not blind obedience to authority, but engaged citizens willing to question, to challenge, and to fight for what was right. My propane tank had taught me that lesson, and I was determined to pass it on to anyone who needed to hear it. The sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. Another day in paradise, hard-won and deeply appreciated. And tomorrow, I'd probably help another homeowner fight another ridiculous HOA regulation. But for tonight, I was just a guy enjoying his patio, his grill, and his propane tank, exactly where they all belonged.